Hey everybody, Shawn here from the Automation Blog and School, and this week on the Automation Podcast, I interview Dan Winchester, Controls Engineer.
Daniel, thank you for coming on the Automation Podcast and allowing me to interview. We're trying to broaden what we do. For about 50 to 60 episodes, I was just having vendors on to talk about new products, which I always find cool. But, I thought a lot of our listeners don't get a chance to go into different plants and meet different people. They really get stuck for 3 to 5 years just with the people they're working with, and they don't get to really reach out and talk to other people from other facilities, especially as we went through COVID. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to get some of my connections on LinkedIn to come on and talk about what they're doing out there. I know you have a really wide history, like I do, going all the way back to PLC 5s and all kinds of software, RSView, and we kind of discussed this in the pre-show. But before we get into any of that, first, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Hey everybody, my name is Dan Winchester. I'm a controls engineer in West Michigan at Kendrick Plastics. And I've been a long-time follower on LinkedIn. I'm glad to be here.
That's awesome, man. I'm glad to have you. And, tell us a little bit about how you got into this, because I don't think you didn't go to school to be a controls engineer, right? So tell us a little bit about your story. I thought it was so interesting.
Well, for me, I'm an electrician by trade. I grew up in the trades, started at 12 years old, working in construction, working for my father. I worked there, in construction as a journeyman electrician, running projects, doing everything from residential, commercial, industrial, and then got tired of going from job to job to job to job to job. So I branched out and went into industrial maintenance. From there, I got introduced to this thing called relay logic, and I was like, whoa, what's that? And I was like 28 or 29 at the time, and had a lot of equipment there that was built in the 70s that we were still running, early 2000s. And that's where I started to learn what controls and automation was, and just kind of grew through maintenance and transferred from one company to another. Once I would plateau at a company, I would try and grow. And once I got to the end of the road, it's like, okay, time to move on and learn more stuff. And I just keep bringing everything that I learned. And, I've worked as an end user, in a facility, for manufacturing facilities, worked for several years as a machine builder, everything from hand cranking on a Bridgeport to wiring panels, whole 9 yards. Complete assembly of all equipment, and now I'm a controls engineer at the facility level for a bright up and coming company here in West Michigan.
That's awesome. And I know, it's not an uncommon story for somebody who starts out as an electrician or a maintenance electrician or a technician. Slightly different backgrounds between those two, but for an electrician to get into controls, because and it's not uncommon for electrical engineers not to know anything about controls. There's no, I guess, one way to get into the world of industrial automation. But I wanted to hear again about some of your early PLC stories, because you were telling me them in the pre-show, and I thought they were pretty interesting. Do you remember back to some of the early days where you first started using PLCs?
Yeah, I remember. It was our large tube mill that we had for the company I worked for, a ton of relay logic, and we had print for the entire control system. It was every bit of 4 inches thick, and it was me and my, we called him, he was an old timer in the plant, and he started teaching me how to read the print and follow things, look at wire numbers and what they actually meant. He taught me the building blocks for, print navigation. And then I realized we had a computer hooked up to everything. And I'm like, what's the computer for? He's like, oh, you can go online with the PLC and see what it's doing. I'm like, why aren't we doing that? And he's like, oh, well, the print's faster. So then it just became a challenge. So him and we would race. Anytime there was a problem on a machine, he'd give me a wire number or an input or something like that wasn't turning on, and we would race to try and find the problem. And then, it just kind of grew from there.
That's awesome.
It was fun.
Yeah. I think, was that RS Logics at the time you were using?
Yep, that was 505.
Okay, yeah, very, very popular. This old
Oh
slick
yeah.
505. Yep,
Yep.
yep. Ethernet too, so it was fast to go online, get things done. So much
Yep.
faster.
Yeah, it was a desktop PC that was just wedged into a corner in a controls room. It just didn't go anywhere. That's all it did.
Now you also used some RS-32 back in the day, right?
Yeah, that was when I worked for a bottling company. We had a lot of SCADAs that were built in RSV32, and that it's entertaining, between sequencers and the old PLC 5s, and then the Slick 500s and all that kind of, or the PLC 5 with the sequencers, RSV32. It was just so much neat old technology that it's very similar to what's in place now, just a little bit of fine refinements.
Yeah, I was actually beta tested RS View before I had the 32 on it. I remember I was actually at a training class for ICOM, and we were learning Intelligent View, and they brought in the Allen Bradley folks because they had just announced their merger, and or Rockwell purchased them, but and they came in and showed us something called Control View for Windows. It was nothing like Control View, but it was RS View, and
Mm.
I ended up getting certified in it, and I created everything from Pong to Space Invaders to LCARS from Star Trek, and it was a great platform, especially once we get to the Pentiums. It really kind of was doggy on the old 486s, but once we get to Pentiums, and still today, you can do the animation in it. It's just so fast. You can actually do animation in it, which is pretty
I had
amazing.
a static Pac-Man in a display that would just sit there and eat
And
just one letter over and over and over again, still running in the screen. It's in the background,
yep,
but
yeah,
it's
I
just one
loved.
of those things.
It was a once it got to maturity, it was such a fun, easy, quick product to use. It had all these add-ons, and then of course Rockwell went in a different way and started doing Factory Talk View, which is very similar. So a lot of
Hmm.
what we learned translated over. I think you used Factory Talk View, ME, and SC, haven't you, in your more
Yeah.
recent roles?
Yep, I've used ME, SE, both local and network distributed SE. So, yeah, I
Yeah, I
think if
loved.
Rockwell makes it, I've used it, except for the historian. I never did anything with that.
Now, tell us a little bit about what you're doing today. I know you were telling me some challenges you have in the plant. We don't want any top secret information or
No,
proprietary
no.
information, but like some of the challenges you've had so far this year, not COVID related, but just things that are happening in the plant and things that you're overcoming. Kind of give us a day in the life. You know.
So one of the things I'm working on right now is we have a machine that's coupled with an injection molding machine,
Mhm.
and we're getting a nuisance fault where at one point somewhere in the logic, the string as it's being moved from tag to tag to tag as it's building the barcode ZPL code for the label, it's losing some of the characters. It's holding the string length, but you get the null character in the positions.
And that's intermittent,
So
right? You said that
yeah,
was
it's
intermittent.
very intermittent.
So hard to find.
Like I think it happened 5 times yesterday over the whole day,
Over
and
the
they're
whole
not
day.
at yeah. So it's just doing, passive tracking, setting up code to try and trap conditions. It's I'm actually putting a lot of strings together, and I set up some FIFO routine that when the fault happens, I have an array of strings, and I'm just writing a string value that I'm building into this FIFO, and so that I can see the last 50 occurrences of it. And so that gives me date, time, and how many times it's happening during the day. And as I'm narrowing down what I'm looking at, I'm using different tags to build the overall string. So, I may be looking at different data, from day to day, but, just using that so that I don't have to be watching it,
Yeah.
and it's actually got me to the point where I'm ready to test out some changes in the logic, a little bit of restructuring of the sequencing, and
Mhm.
then using different commands rather than copies, using synchronous copies and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the old synchronous copy. A lot of people don't, it's funny too because I'm doing some PLC courses for PLCs other than Rockwell, and been using PLCs other than Rockwell. These other vendors have been just great to our channel, sending in samples and doing advertising. So it's really been a godsend for us here. And if you're not familiar with control logics or compact logics, you wouldn't know that it's asynchronous. That data can show up in the tag
Oh yeah.
values at any time. It's like totally irrelevant to the undetached from the scan of any of your routines or programs, or tasks. So it's synchronous copies. That's one thing we use. For anybody in the audience who don't know, I mean that's a way to copy information without allowing it to change while you're copying it. So the controller knows that I need to get this data, and nobody can write to it. I have to have it all in one time slice. I can't have it updating while I'm copying it,
Yeah.
and which is important in a case where you may have a racing condition or something happening. You can eliminate all that.
Yeah, it's actually, I probably wouldn't have thought about it except for I've been learning Ignition,
Okay.
and then the Python scripting in the back end that works with Ignition. I started learning about synchronous and asynchronous writing to tags and whatnot, and then I'm like, wait a minute, I wonder if that's what's causing this, because I'm just bumping the same data through a string of tags in a single rung of logic through different branches, and it's like, I bet you we need to use a synchronous copy and not an asynchronous copy, which is what's going on.
Yeah. Yep. And that's a pretty common. Even if you import a like to make the control logics act like it's an older PLC. When you import like a Slick 500 code, it won't make put it all the code into a continuous. It's more time based because of that. So it's trying to emulate that type of, you know, okay, we're going to call it. Here's its tags, and it can go do its thing without worrying about the asynchronous behavior, which adds up, kind of makes it kind of messy when you import one of those old
Oh,
routines.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen programs that were imported from a PLC 5 into Control Logics, and they get messy,
They
very,
do.
very messy.
It's nice that it does it, but it can be really messy. I mean, I would hate to have to type everything in over again. At least you can rename stuff and do that
Oh
stuff
yeah.
too. So tell us about. I have never used Ignition. Tell us what you think so far. You've been using it for a while. Do you like it? Is it good?
Actually, I've really enjoyed it. With everything that I've done with machine HMIs and SCADA applications and whatnot, it was pretty intuitive for me to start to pick up the Ignition Vision, which
Okay.
is one of the modules for visualization. I started dabbling with perspective a little bit, but as far as the back end of it goes, it is so intuitive. It's phenomenal. There are so many different things they can do with it. It takes the place of like transaction manager.
Hmm. Hmm.
You have the same capabilities with that. You can set up a database connection to where you can read and write to databases, for uh, your different query types. You can set up historical tags. So you can do live trending, historical trending through your screens, right, all within the same application. And is it's more like a network distributed version of Vue SE, to where
Okay.
if you make a change,
Yep.
it pushes it out to the clients that are using it, rather than you have to go to every single client to make an update, because it's all
Yeah.
server based.
Which is nice. Really nice.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get them on the show. I got to reach out to them again. It's funny you mentioned transaction manager, which used to be called Rascal, RSSQL, and
Hmm.
I used to love that package. I thought it was just so intuitive and so easy to use, and whether most people were using SQL Server at the time because they would have they would be a Microsoft house. But it's a package I enjoyed using, and it was it's kind of being replaced today with MQTT and you know,
Hmm.
um, uh, you know,
Oh,
that whole thing.
transaction manager works fantastic.
Yeah.
I agree. It's very intuitive.
Yep.
I started learning and actually setting up new transactions on my own in an afternoon. A
Yeah.
little bit of manual, a little bit of Google, and the application,
Yeah. I
and got
was
things up and going.
I was actually demoing Transaction Manager to a customer who was supposed to on 9/11, and yeah, but a great product. I really always
Yeah.
enjoyed using
Oh
that,
yeah.
using that product. So tell me, I mean, what do you think are the as we go for the next 5 years, what do you think, or what would you like to see, or what do you guess we'll see in industrial automation? I mean, there's a lot of cool products out there, a lot of different people vying for, like MQTT is trying to take over that, from your location to the cloud as being the connector. It's kind of being, it's like OPC. It's kind of doing it by default. There's no one person trying to push it, but a lot of people are adopting it. And then a lot of the you know devices, PLCs, are coming with displays on them where you can go through and
Yeah.
like if you've never seen the Siemens, for the audience, if you've never seen the SM1500, that display is awesome. It's almost like a hymn on a drive, right?
Yeah, there's
With
so many troubleshooting tools that are in
Yeah,
that display on that 1500.
it is amazing, and it's just like, it's like I smile every time I go to use it. Of course, the 1200 doesn't have that, but I even like I use the 1100 a lot because it's small and I can bring it with me to
Hmm.
work on courses and lessons and whatnot. And even that little display it's at least you got it right. You can't The 1100 won't let you set the IP address, but you can view it. And but what did you have any thoughts on what you would like to see come out in the next 5 years, or what you think will come out?
Well, I know with what I was doing with Ignition at a previous employer,
Hmm.
I started really digging into, you know, the digital transformation, unified namespace, all the big buzzwords that are going on with the Industry
Yeah.
4.0 push. It's like that controller that's on your table right there in front of you that comes with an embedded OPC UA server,
Yep.
which is fantastic. Uh, but there's downfalls to OPC UA. It's a two-way communication. So it's extra bandwidth utilization on your network backbone. That's where MQT is really starting to draw attention, is because the way that is designed, you have a client that it as tags that are set up within that client, as they are outdated, it just pushes the update to the broker. It's not the broker reaching out at a subscription rate and calling for changes and pulling everything. It's just, it's almost like an on demand.
Yeah, almost like a
you
report
know
by exception type of scenario.
yes,
Yep.
exactly. It's
Yep.
report by exception.
Yep.
And so that frees up a lot of the network bandwidth that's going to allow us to start pulling more information from the machines. A lot of the data that is there that nobody's even using, for device health, network health. Um, like if you're doing any type of motion or motors and whatnot, you can monitor current load. I mean, there's so much data available within an automation system that doesn't make it out.
Yep.
So just the whole digital transformation and pulling data and converting that data into usable information to help us as professionals in the industry to improve, make our equipment better, make it more robust, more reliable.
Mhm.
you know that For me, that's exciting, and I can't wait to continue doing that. So
Yeah, I know we've used here, the RTA has a MQTT device, which kind of
mhm.
is a standalone box. It's just a box up here. But it's a standalone box, and it's a nice thin box about the size of an IO module, and it'll query up to so many controllers and send it up. So it acts as the guy who goes and gets the data and then sends it to the broker via MQTT. And
Mhm.
I use Mosquito just here internally, which was pretty easy to set up. But I know Siemens has some their edge devices, like small little computer edge devices that can
Mhm.
do the same thing. And um, I believe ProSoft, we just interviewed them and we released that. I believe they're doing something similar with their data logger plus. And so it seems to be a very popular thing. I'm always concerned about cybersecurity. So we all know what
You know,
happened on the
that's
East Coast. Yeah, God.
yeah, that's the other edge of that sword. You know, with the push of more data flowing from equipment into a different location, we have to be mindful of the cybersecurity end of it. And coming from the OT realm, we have to be willing to accept some of the restrictions from IT. You
Yeah.
know, that's it's actually one of the podcasts of yours that I shared with a bunch of coworkers of mine was that IT OT convergence.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely paramount. And we have to be willing to accept some of the restrictions of IT just to make sure that our OT systems are secure. Because without that security, we won't have a system.
Yeah, I believe that was Phoenix Contact talking about
Mm-hmm.
that convergence. It was for Cybersecurity Month. I think it was September or October last year, 21. And I think she did a great job. She really did.
Oh, it was. It was
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, I did, and I'll let her know too. I'll throw a shout out to her. Um, but she's their networking person, and they have some great devices. And some people take different approaches to it. You look at the bright red IFM, devices I have behind me. They have a separate IoT port or IIoT port, so that you can send data securely out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not on your main field bus, your Ethernet IP or Profinet, which I think is cool. And then what was the other device I was going to talk about? Oh, it's totally slipped my mind. But there are people who are doing that where it's Banner. We had them on for Snap Signal, and it's a way you
Yeah.
can just put a device out in the field, split it. So maybe an analog is going to your PLC. You split it off, and now you have that second Snap Signal network that is can be totally safe, and it doesn't relate to controlling your system. It's just data, and they can also send signals back if they want to turn a light on or something. But
Mm-hmm.
it keeps that divorced from your controls network. I mean, it seems like just a couple months ago. It was actually last year when a pipeline was shut down. Gas prices went to $7 a gallon, which may not sound like much now, but back then when gas was around $2 a gallon, that's a huge
It's a
jump.
huge jump. Yeah.
Jump, and I think everybody knows about the water department was somebody who had access to VPN and was playing with the chemical settings. Thank goodness the operator was there and saw it and immediately changed them back. But they're we cannot let people like Coca-Cola. They already know they have to hide. They have to protect the secret recipe for their syrup, right? They already know
Oh
all
yeah.
about that, right? But a lot of plants don't think about that. And you know, it's not so much like if you're making glass jars. If you can't make glass jars, that's bad for the company, right? But if you're a water department or you're making something that people are going to eat or consume, or some way deal with the grid. I mean, look at all the storms went through last night, and well, this won't go out today, but the storms went through Texas yesterday and took out a lot of people were in blackouts and brownouts yesterday because of the grid. And just think of what would happen if somebody and there are power plants out there who don't follow the rules and have open VPNs or very weak security, and I can't blame them. There are banks that have trillions and trillions of dollars that get hacked all the time. So
Oh
we have to
yeah.
be a little bit smarter than we have to think of fail. It's like safety, right? We have safety in the plant. We do all these things, right? Lockout, tag out. We do all these things to ensure that no matter what happens, we're safe, right? And I kind of look at security that way. What do you think? Is
I'm actually a very I'm very open to the IT concepts with security and whatnot. Matter of fact, my last job, I actually worked in IT.
Okay.
I was a controls engineer tied to an IT department, and I helped do that marriage between OT and IT on the networking end of it. And like one of my previous employers, we had a fairly robust, pretty thoroughly developed Purdue model through our network. We had everything for enterprise level. We had our DMZ with, multiple firewalls. We actually had 3 sets of firewalls, I believe, in the facility,
Mhm.
in that networking between external network, and then firewalls between DMZ and the enterprise network, then firewall between DMZ and the OT networking. And we had just a gigantic network there at that facility. But, it's there for a reason. It's to protect the equipment. Like you were saying, people know that they have to protect, a secret recipe. But, I know of a company out on the West Coast that had a technician on his programming laptop that had, outside access, from his programming laptop, downloaded some game on his programming laptop while he was connected to the OT network and allowed an intrusion to the OT network. And Siri's talking. But they had the intrusion from outside, and they wound up pretty much bricking every controller. They cleared every PLC in the entire facility. Everything that was on the OT network was back to factory original.
Oh man, that's painful. And a lot of places they don't have everything backed up, and which is sad. But a lot of people don't have it all backed up, which is So, and that's, I think you bring up another point too, is it doesn't have to be, you don't have to plug your OT network into the internet. They can come through your Wi-Fi and your laptop to get it to the OT network. They can come, if you have your phone connected to the OT Wi-Fi and to the cell service, they can come through that way.
Exactly.
So we need and the vendors have been doing great. Cisco's doing great. Panduit's doing great stuff. Siemens has done, all the vendors who have anything that touches a network have done great articles, great seminars about this. But and we're trying to get ISA on to talk about the cybersecurity standard that they've released and continue to work on. But yeah, that's my biggest concern. What about, I'm hearing rumors. I shouldn't say rumors. Rocco's actually been talking about it up and leading up to Rock Live, which this may or may not come out before or after. I'm not sure. But what do you think about, software as a service? Like I have for the business here, I have Microsoft Office 365 because, it just comes with so many great things that, if I went out and spent $300 on one key for myself, that would be locked to a couple different computers. I have multiple computers. Probably like you, I got multiple computers all over the place. And, I want to be able to sign in and use it anywhere. And it comes with cloud backup, and it comes with Teams. We're on Teams right now, and, all of that for under $15 a month. So, in one way, I've been won over by the software as a service, but I believe Rockwell, I know Siemens has just launched is just launching their product now, TIA Portal in the cloud, and I'm still coming up to speed on it. But I think Rockwell is also going to be doing that. What do you think? Do you think I worry that because I'm on an OT network that needs to stay secure, I'm wondering how that would affect most people. Would that even be an option?
At that point, it really depends on what the firewall requirements are in order to authenticate the application that you're using. Is it something that, I got to believe if Siemens is doing it, they've thoroughly thought out and, planned this out because, the last place I worked was a Siemens house. And I'm familiar with the way that they design their software and their equipment. It's very robust, and everything I've seen has been very well thought out. So I would think that there's got to be just a tremendous amount of consideration for the security requirements included in that. And I don't know. I think having the cloud connection requirement could be a hindrance, honestly, with the software authentication, because there's places, that don't have robust Wi-Fi networks. So you can't go out, to a remote corner in a facility and have a good Wi-Fi connection while you're plugged into, a VFD and you're trying to troubleshoot it. And you need to open up, some software, but then you have to get to the internet to authenticate it. So, in my opinion, that could be a downfall, but the flexibility provided, so like if you're in a growing company, and you're onboarding new people, and your needs are changing, you're being very flexible and growing, that there's a lot of potential benefit there. So you could quickly and easily add new seats without having to go out and spend a ton of money,
Mm,
on a full-blown license rather than, a subscription.
yeah. Yeah, I know. I always think back to this bread company, bakery in Vermont when Factory Talk Activation first came out, and it was so confusing for them because nothing on the plant floor is connected to the internet. So we had to
Yeah.
go in the office, get the activation, walk it out to the computer out there, and it was a painful just getting into the computer so you could stick something in because it was really secure. There was no USB ports or drives that were
Yeah, I
exposed,
was going
right?
to say, what about the IT departments that lock out all USB ports, but now you have a hasp dongle
Yep.
that you need.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's another consideration. I guess maybe for the engineering firms, for the integrators, for the OEMs who are connected, they're making machines, they're not producing products, or
mhm.
so they're typically in an office environment that has internet. They're a lot of times they're pulling down drawings and pulling down updates and reading tech notes. So they're on most of their day. They're connected, and they only disconnect for you know 24 to 48 hours at a time. So I can see it being good for them, especially if you had a large engineering office. I
Yeah.
can see where it would be good there. It'll be interesting to see how the pricing comes out. I've been tracking the price over the years as it just keeps going up and up and up. Um, I just find it silly because you get less and less, and the price is more and more. So I do like what the Siemens guys do with their software. I think it's like all inclusive, pretty much all inclusive for like $3,000 or around that. I do think the safety is separate, but you get all the
Yeah, I would say,
languages, you get all the PLCs.
yeah, it's the Step 7 DAD license is for the most part pretty all inclusive for the base PLC. Then you have the WinCC license for your HMI application, and then the F programming module or F programming license for safety.
Yeah,
That's an additional adder. I
but
think.
35, I think it's 3,000 or 3,500. It does all the 1,500s except for the safety or the tech, any of the special.
Mhm.
I think it does everything but the safety. And
Yeah,
there is a
everything but
separate
safety.
motion. There is a separate, I believe well, I shouldn't say that, but I know it does all the languages. It does
Hmm.
all the languages. It does small and big. And I think it's, it's, if you look at, and I'm not trying to pick on any vendor, but if you contrast it to uh, Studio 5000 full, is I think twice as much. So it's a disparity, and I'm always thinking of my the price is only relevant for us because I'm always thinking of my students. About half of my students are self-funded, so they're trying to
Yeah.
learn at home. So I'm constantly trying to tell them, "Well, get this starter pack, and it has this license," and always trying to help them get set up because half. It's funny, we have a lot of corporate students, but about half of our students are people just teaching themselves because their company doesn't have
Yeah.
a training budget. So, but have you used the WinCC at all? I know you've used Factory Talk. Did you ever get a chance at your last
Um,
place to use the WinCC?
I used it for troubleshooting,
Oh, all right.
for like actually probably more. I would have an engineer say, "Hey, I want to look at this data over here,"
Yeah.
and they would show me where it was at on the HMI, and then through there I would
Oh, okay.
backtrack it into the PLC. For me, I use the HMI as a troubleshooting tool
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the
yeah.
time.
Yep.
Because it's like, okay, I have a picture, I want to see that, and then I just look up what's driving the animation, what it's tied to, and that points me in the the correct direction in the PLC to figure out, well, what the problem would be.
And that's when you work in a facility, there's no way it's almost impossible to have had a finger and put in every single system together. So,
Yeah.
and it's a quick way because you can visually see it on the HMI and can say, okay,
Oh
we need
yeah.
to know why that's not doing what it's doing. Where is that in the code?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's many times like because my last job I was doing a lot of data collection. So like, oh, I need this data from this machine. And it's like, all right, come over here, take them to my desk and pull up the HMI. And what screen is it on? Start going through the screens. They'd be like, oh, it's on that screen. It's these data points. And like, okay. So then I would know what to tie in to record. That way they got what they wanted first try instead of me just guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and of course they typically want you to data log what they see on the screen, which makes a
Hmm.
lot of sense. So with that, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you have to get back to work. You got to plant the run. But
Yeah.
any final thoughts or words before we wrap up this? You're the first one I interviewed who's like a controls engineer out there doing the job. So I really appreciate you coming on and being the guinea pig for this.
Well, I'm kind of used to being the guinea pig and trying new things out all the time, but you know, really, I'm honored. It's I've been following you for quite a while now on LinkedIn. I always read your posts. I bought books from your store. I haven't bought any of the training. Just
Well, you probably don't need it because you've got the experience now.
well, I know we were talking before you started doing the TIA portal and the Step 7 stuff, and you were talking about doing that, but um, I just dug in and started forcing myself to learn it. But now again, just really honored, glad to be here.
No, I'm honored to have you on, and people can connect with Dan on LinkedIn. What's your LinkedIn profile name if somebody, a professional colleague, wanted to connect with you?
Daniel Winchester.
Daniel Winchester. So just look him up. You can't miss his beard. Um, and he looks like he's on like the old show Duck Dynasty. I'm like, yay, that's one of the ducks. Um, but all kidding aside, he posts some great stuff on LinkedIn, and we'll look. Maybe we'll get you back in a few months and see what's new and what's going on out there. But for now, I want to thank you for coming on, Dan. Really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure.
Now, I want to thank Dan again for taking time out of his busy schedule to come on the show and tell us all about his career and what he's been working on. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a like and a sub. And if you'd like to get in touch with me or follow me, you can do so over at automation.locals.com. You'll also find my affordable PLC, HMI, and SCADA courses over at theautomationschool.com. And with that said, I want to wish you all a very happy, safe, and healthy week. And until next time, peace.